ratcheted up. That too is skating recklessly close to the line of propriety. Such skating close to the line and pushing the envelope at all costs, and doing so in the self-interest of both one's employer and oneself, I believe are part and parcel of the accepted, indeed encouraged, motivational mix of those who are employed in for-profit corporations. No longer is it the case, if indeed it ever was, that companies take pride in, quote, earning money the old-fashioned way, and, quote, as Smith Barney formerly described its practice, at least as we old-fashioned people understand, quote, the old-fashioned way to mean. So exactly the opposite has been the accepted motivation, the ethical gold standard for public office holding over the ages. The most widely admired public officials are those who distance themselves and their behavior as far away from the illegal or unethical edge as they possibly can. They do not wish to court even the appearance of impropriety in seeking their own self-interest, much less the reality of it. Paragons of public virtue allow themselves to be motivated not by their respective material self-interest, but by what the public is, but what the public interest is as they see it. The many problems we have been facing in the public sector are the result, I think, therefore, of the ethos of the market, the assertion of self-interest beyond the boundaries of law and propriety, spreading into and thereby corrupting the processes of government and the practices of politics. The prophet Isaiah, writing 2,700 years ago, had this to say about the phenomenon. Seek justice, encourage the oppressed, defend the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow, but your silver has become dross, your choice wine is diluted with water, your rulers are rebels, companions of thieves, they all love bribes and chase after gifts. Now, if you have been listening to me, you will challenge me by asserting that the political system and the public office holding also have a role for appropriate self-interest. And I will respond by saying that indeed they do, but that the functioning of self-interest in those two arenas is qualitatively different from that in the for-profit or market sector. Some kinds of self-interest, one's interest in getting elected or re-elected, for example, are indeed also a dominant and proper motivation for acting in the political system and the public sector, although such assertions of self-interest are usually thought of as being not so much in one's own self-interest as in the public interest in having good people seek and win election to positions of leadership. What does motivate office holders to seek office? Is it personal ambition for the power and glory of the spotlight of public office? Or is it the overriding mission of accomplishing a change or creating something new in the public interest for the public good? If it is a dominantly personal ambition for power and glory, is that acceptable too? Let's call the former self-interest or personal ego and the latter public interest or mission commitment. Obviously, we all have egos and we all have legitimate self-interest, even, perhaps especially, those who are driven primarily by a mission commitment. But let us remember that self-interest or ego alone is never a sufficient reason, an ethical reason to hold public office, and that it is always the mission commitment of a candidate that redeems whatever amount of ego motivates him or her in the first place and transforms self-interest into public interest. Why is that so? Because it is only those candidates who are motivated by mission who will not so easily, so casually trim his or her sails on the positions that are central to his or her mission. He or she will not so willingly sacrifice the goals of the mission in order to attain the glory of office. Those who do sacrifice the goals of the mission in order to achieve election have to be suspected of being motivated more by ego than by mission in the first place. The great recent exemplars of mission-oriented politics in North Carolina have been Terry Sanford and Jim Hunt. There is a reason that they are both called North Carolina's education governors. Ego was secondary to their passion for improving education and jobs in North Carolina. They ran for office in order to improve education. It was that mission commitment that was the be-all and end-all of their ambition for public office, and not the reverse. It was their mission commitment that redeemed and transformed their quest for positions of power through which to achieve their missions. The Hebrew word for public official is nasi, which is the same word for clouds. That connotes the fact that, properly speaking, public officials are lifted up like clouds into the skies, elevated above all others for the sole purpose of conferring benefits on the public as a whole, just as the rain clouds benefit the land by shedding its rain on the crops. As a famous rabbi said to two students whom he was seeking to persuade to take a public position, "You think it is an honor that I offer you, but it is not. It is the worthier role of public service that I offer you, the opportunity to serve the public." So, I am now about to close. That very same imperialism in behalf of self-interest that characterizes the dominant motivation of those in the for-profit sector has also corrupted public consciousness in American society as a whole. American society therefore confronts an ever-increasing problem in the unwillingness of Americans to govern, that is, to limit their own wants, that is, themselves, their desires. Everyone wants to, quote, grab for all the gusto they can get. Democracy, properly understood, is not only about expressing one's individual and group wants. It is also very much about balance and restraining one's self-seeking in the interest of others in society. In other words, in the public interest as a whole. Democracy, as President Kennedy famously pointed out, is not only about what our country, that is our society, does for us, but what we are obliged and expected to do for our country. In fact, we use the term self-government in two different senses. Self-government is a superb democratic means for organizing and sustaining groups of people living together productively in comparative harmony. But self-government also, and very importantly, means the governing, that is, the limiting of self as distinguished from the governing by ourselves. Self-government means not only individuals banding together to make decisions about how they live and work together, in other words, to express their group decisions about running the society in which they live, but it also means decisions by individuals to govern, that is, to limit or constrain the wants and needs and appetites of themselves. In 21st century America, the greatest challenge to democracy itself is the unwillingness of the haves to restrain our self-interest, to govern our own desires and wants for our own sake as well as for the sake of the public interest in supplying the wants and needs of the have-nots. Interest group self-advocacy is the dominant paradigm in both academic and practical politics. Reduced to its extreme, it is not much different from Hobbes's war of all against all, waged with sometimes more and sometimes less civility. The aim of the antagonist is to get more of the pie for me or for us, that is less than society as a whole, others who share my condition professionally or ethnically or racially or socioeconomically. Where is the force for the common good, and how does one define the common good? What is the source of advocacy in behalf of us as a whole, as opposed to me? The aim of ethical discourse has always been to move people from acting in their narrow self-interest first to a broader self-interest, which Adam Smith called enlightened self-interest, and ultimately to what is not self-interest at all, but the interest of most of those in society as a whole. While you may think of Adam Smith primarily as the author of The Wealth of Nations, never forget that he believed his more important volume was The Theory of Moral Sentiments, in which he spelled out the critical importance of ethical and altruistic behavior in society. Our democracy worked very well for a century or more in the small towns of New England and the rest of the nation. Because of its small size and intimacy, it was able to fulfill the common interest, even as the intimacy it afforded to its participants was successful in inducing the subordination of individual wants to the good of the whole. It still works reasonably well at the local level all across this country, but at the state and national levels, which are at a considerable remove from the influence of people who know and are known by other people, our democracy